I know that you're a firm believer not only in democracy but in democratic outcomes, and in trusting them, in putting your trust in them. And I could relate very much to what you wrote about looking at the nation. Really, it was your dad after the 2016 election of Donald Trump, and saying, I was on the air very late with Fox News that night, got home at maybe 3 a.m. And I was supposed to appear on Live with Kelly Ripa. I don't even remember who her co-host was at the time. I think it was Strahan, but he wasn't there that day. And so it was moments after we had just announced that Donald Trump was president. And I went on that show, and she was very, very upset prior to air that he had won. You know, her husband is Latino, and he had said very controversial things, and she was feeling under threat, and her children and so on. So we talked a bit backstage about it. And then I went out onto the stage and said exactly to the public what I had said to her, which is there's a whole faction of Americans who feels heard now for the first time in years after having been ignored, really ignored. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for America. That bodes well for the outcome of America long term, no matter how you feel about it short term. And your dad, who's Muslim American, and also Trump had said some controversial things about Muslims, and there were a lot of minority groups who were feeling like, oh, what does this mean for me? Women too, right? What does this mean for me? He had that same long-range perspective that net, this is going to be a good thing, and democracies work. Take us back to that moment.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, my dad shared some wisdom with me the morning after Trump won. So that night, like a lot of people in DC, I was at an election party, and what started out celebratory turned very dark, and people started crying. I got back home pretty late, and I talked to my brother on the phone, and basically our biggest concern was our parents. It wasn't so much about me and my brother. It was about what might happen to mom and dad. My mom wears the headscarf. My parents are visibly immigrants. And as you said, Trump did say some crazy things. It's easy to forget just how focused Trump was on Muslims. He had a sort of preoccupation with us. And he had even, entertained some really frightening things that, thank God, didn't actually come to pass and was just kind of campaign rhetoric. But, making reference to registering Muslims in a database, refusing to condemn the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And then you start to wonder, like, what might actually happen to us as American Muslims. So I cried that night talking to my brother, thinking about, my parents and our future in the country. And then I talked to my dad the following morning, and he was just so chill about it because he had seen the alternative. He had faith in America, in part because he's an immigrant. And I think in this sense, immigrants and the children of immigrants sometimes can see something about America that people who have been here for generations might lose sight of, which is our democracy has worked, and it probably will continue to work. It'll come under tension. There'll be points where we doubt ourselves, but our democracy is resilient. And I actually experienced the 4 years of Trump with a kind of sigh of relief. I mean, I thought Trump was pretty bad, but the worst case scenarios didn't come to pass. And we got through it, and then Americans decided to make another choice, and they voted for Joe Biden. And that's the way, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. There's alternation of power. You see someone for 4 years, then you assess the performance, and then you can go a different direction. So that's why I think that when I talk to, fellow liberals, I always say, well, look, Donald Trump won fair and square in 2016. We don't have to like it, but we have to respect the outcome instead of trying to delegitimize it through Russiagate and through all the other things that were going on in those first couple of years, where at some basic level, we as liberals were not able to come to terms with the reality of Donald Trump, and we let him get in our minds, and we became obsessed with Donald Trump. I think still many people are, right? And I think for me, I draw a lot from my experiences in the Middle East, because as you alluded to earlier, at the start of the Arab Spring in a country like Egypt, there was that euphoria, but then in free and fair elections, a right-wing religious movement, an Islamist movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, won consecutive elections. And then I saw my relatives in Egypt. I mean, I'm born and raised in Pennsylvania, but my family comes from Egypt. I saw how my secular elite relatives in Egypt, they said basically, well, we like democracy in theory, but if democracy produces a right-wing religious party, then actually maybe we don't like democracy anymore. And this is the danger of judging democracy solely on its outcomes, that you only like democracy or accept it if your own party wins, or if it leads to outcomes of progress and liberalism or gender equality, whatever it might be. These are all valuable things for many Americans, but democracy won't always lead in that direction. And that's the whole point of democracy. You don't know what's going to happen before people vote. People can choose to go in other directions depending on their preferences. So when I come back to the US in 2014 after being in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, I try to bring those lessons with me because I think there's something really important there, that we have to come to terms with election results that we don't like. That is the test of democracy. And Trump really forced us to contend with that.
Oh, and how? We'll get to that in 1 second. But one point I wanted to make is this is why I think it's so important to have the executive branch be small in power, as the founders intended. They never wanted a strong executive. They had fled that. They didn't want another king. And the legislative branch seeds fights over student debt, loan, quote, forgiveness, and COVID emergencies, quote unquote, never ending, at its own peril. It is meant to be a very strong, robust branch of government. And it's also one in which we have so much more say, over which we have so much more say, right? Because we elect those House of Representative congressmen and women every 2 years. They answer directly to us. They come from our town. They're supposed to represent our values. The Senate, longer, but still powerful, important positions. And we should not be electing a king. And when there is executive overreach, which there certainly was during the Obama administration, and I would say to a lesser extent, but still present during the Trump administration, we must revolt. We must stand up and say, no, you're small. You are the least important figure in this government, not the most important. And we're letting that go under president after president. It's getting dangerous.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And this is part of when the state is so strong, then it makes every election feel like the most important election of your lifetime. And that's something that we heard in the lead up to our own midterms a few weeks ago. Everyone was freaking out, or at least a lot of people were freaking out, especially on Twitter, saying democracy would die and there was only one choice at the ballot box and all of this. And part of the reason people feel that level of intensity is because whoever does win control of the Senate, or in 2024, control of the presidency, really does have a lot of power to change things and to try to transform the broader culture of the nation. So we have to find ways to lower the stakes. Elections shouldn't feel so existential. And then the question is, how do we find a way to maybe not so much weaken the state, but let's just be careful. Not everything should be about the federal government, because that is going to mean that we're perpetually afraid of election outcomes. We're always going to freak out if the other party wins.
Most things shouldn't. Most things should not depend on the federal government. The vision was that the entire federal government would be small. The executive branch within it would be the smallest and the least powerful, but that for the most part, the powers would be reserved to the states. And we'd have these 50 or at the time 13, whatever laboratories, where we could each find a way to live within our own whatever value judgments, cultures, approach to legislation, the police state, and so on. And that's what we've been doing, right? That's why New York is so different from Texas. But somehow we've ceded authority to this, no particular man I'm thinking of, but just this sort of out of control executive monster who's king-like in his approach to everything. And we're allowing it. We're allowing it to the point where we get this scared. We ran this bite not long before the election. This is Michael Beschloss, presidential historian on MSNBC, who lost his mind in advance of the midterms.
Chris, 6 nights from now, we could all be discussing violence all over this country. We could be 6 days away from losing our rule of law and losing a situation where we have elections that we all can rely on. In 50 years from now, if historians are allowed to write in this country, and if there are still free publishing houses and a free press, which I'm not certain of, but if that is true, a historian will say what was at stake tonight and this week was the fact whether we will be a democracy in the future, whether our children will be arrested and conceivably killed. We're on the edge of a brutal authoritarian system, and it could be a week away.
Shadi,
wow.
Come on.
Okay, I'm speechless. I actually hadn't seen that clip before, so I'm glad that you shared it. I mean, I saw some crazy talk in the lead up. I did not see that. That's ridiculous. It's bonkers. Whether historians will be allowed to write in the future, whether our children will be arrested or even killed. But I think that even though that might be an extreme example, that general vibe was actually quite mainstream. And that's why, I tell folks, if anyone tells you that this is the most important election of your lifetime, you should immediately be skeptical of that person. That person has lost their sense of proportion and reality. And this is, I think, part of what Trump does to people. He just burrows himself into your mind, and you can no longer analyze things objectively. But I think people also like the thrill of having an enemy. So Michael Beschloss there, he probably felt like he was a revolutionary. He's actually facing the possible end of the American Republic. That can be an exciting feeling that you're actually standing up and you're the one, along with your compatriots, you're going to save America. That is an exciting thing. And people want enemies. That's how they increasingly define themselves. They find an opponent, they delegitimize that opponent, they talk about how the world is about to end. And democracy shouldn't actually be that way, because in a two-party system, Republicans will eventually win, either on the presidential level or retaking the Senate in the future. So when people say, well, if only we could have a permanent Democratic majority, that's also a red flag. No one should want a permanent majority from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because that would mean one-party rule. And democracy at its core is about alternation of power.
It's the Christmas and holiday season and time for gift giving, parties with friends and family, and for getting compliments everywhere you go, we hope. Thanks to the fact that you look years younger, courtesy of Genucel. Millions love Genucel's products, and for good reason. From now through Christmas, Genucel's most popular package, all their best stuff, is 70% off at Genucel.com. Treat yourself and a loved one to the absolute best skincare in the world. See those troubling forehead lines, fine lines, skin redness, puffy bags, puffiness, even a sagging jawline disappear right before your eyes with Genucel's most popular collection. With its immediate effects product, you can see results in less than 12 hours guaranteed, or you can get your money back. And included in every most popular package is your free hyaluronic acid serum for skin hydration that will restore your youthful appearance. Visit Genucel.com/MK now. Enter my special promo, MK, for an additional 10% off your entire order. Every order today is instantly upgraded to free express shipping, so nothing to worry about in terms of getting it before the holidays. Genucel.com/MK60. That's GENUCEL.com/MK60. Genucel.com/MK60. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.